Um, well, thanks everybody for joining us. Good morning, good evening. I think between Yusuf and I, we've got that covered. Today we're going to talk about the plugin framework that we're launching. It's very exciting. My name's Matt Fellows. I'm a principal product manager here at SmartBear. I look after the Pact Flow products, but more pertinent to today's conversation, I'm one of the maintainers of Pact. And I'm very excited to talk to you about this massive development in our ecosystem. Yusuf, did you want to say hello as well?
Hello, I'm Yusuf. Lovely to meet you all. I'm a developer advocate here at Pact Flow, community shepherd of Pact. So really pleased to be able to share this news with you.
Thanks, Yusuf. So let's get on with the session. Just a quick reminder, we are recording the session. Not just going to matter too much without your faces. But before we get started, this will just help us kind of understand, where you are in your journey with Pact, and kind of what you've been doing and how long. So the first question we've got is, I guess, how are you storing your contracts? So assuming you're using Pact, are you using our open source Pact broker? Are you using the Pact Flow version of the broker, or are you doing something else, like storing in Git or, passing it by carrier pigeon or something? And the second question is, how long have you been doing contract testing for? And that'll probably be fascinating to understand, just given that the plugin is a new development, and to understand how long you've been in our ecosystem and what kind of challenges you've been facing. And later on, we'll try and understand a little bit more about, I guess, what you're hoping to get from this as well. I'll give that another second or so.
Thanks for getting involved in the poll, and just to let you know, I think we've got the web chat opened up now.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, folks. Okay, so moving forward, let's talk about what we're actually going to do today in this session. What are we going to get from the session? So the plan is to give you some background as to why we built the plugin framework in the first place. So why it exists, what we're actually doing. We're going to talk about what it is, how it works, and most importantly, why you want to get involved with it right now. Why use it? We're then going to do a demo of kind of how it works, talk about how you can get involved, and of course we would love to answer as many questions as we can. So again, do use that chat throughout the program, and also through the Q&A, user Q&A as well, and we'll take pauses throughout the session to do that. All right, so what next? Let's talk a little bit about why the plugin framework exists. What's the reason for doing this? And I think it's always good to sort of go back to what we get, the feedback we get from our customers and for our users. And this is actually a Pact Flow prospect that we spoke to probably about a year ago now, but I think it really sums up the kinds of conversations we've been having with customers, both in the commercial space and in the open source forums. So I'll just read it for you. So, we're going to just think about the guy. He's the head of a testing department in a large financial organization, and we'll just call him Bill because we're going to protect the innocent. And he's, as I said, he's a leader of about 40 teams inside this bank. So he goes on to say, he said, look, we've got a very large program with many different Scrum teams building a wide variety of components, all operating in a microservices event-based architecture. And testing inside that, with a set of integrated environments is extremely challenging today. And we're looking to use tools like contract testing to help solve that. And this last point is a really key bit. It's like between direct calls to RESTful architectures, GraphQL APIs, or messages using EventBridge or Kafka, and also third-party SaaS and partner integrations, it's very difficult to manage. So I think what you can take away from this is that he works in a very chaotic environment and he's looking to, I guess, bring ways to calm this chaos and to bring some level of control and process to the ecosystem. And if that sounds like your architecture or your company, you're not alone. Research from SmartBear State of Quality API report really back this up. It says basically 2 in 3 customers are seeing massive growth from microservices, and that they're going to expect the biggest growth in APIs with microservices over the next few years. 80% of customers are operating in a multi-protocol environment, and just almost 60% are using 3 or more protocols. So it's really common to have a huge growth of microservices now, and also very polyglot, very multi-framework, multi-language. The second insight here that I think is really fascinating is that internal integration is actually becoming the focus. So what we're saying here is that the microservices being built aren't necessarily for use cases to be made public to the world. They're about internal integration and really opening up new use cases and data between systems inside the organization. And last year, this really didn't really feature as a big thing. And so really, there's a lot going on beneath the tip of that API iceberg. So what we see also moving forward is that there's a lot of headwinds in the microservices space, in that the common thing that comes up now is this study of microservices sprawl, right? And where there's a design gap and a testing gap in how we deal with this. And organizations are looking for tools that can work across the spectrum of those types of APIs. And some of those barriers include complexity and those systems, the demands on speed of delivery, and the limited time to do that because of the workload. And so that's causing some issues. But what I found really fascinating is that mature organizations are actually feeling the pain more so than even those who are joining, getting involved with contract testing, getting involved with API development early. And I think the reason for that is, as you would have seen some of our videos before, is that as you get to that large scale, only then, when you start to grow and scale out your workloads, that's when you start to feel the pain, not really when you've only got a couple of APIs. And I think this is why the mature organizations started to feel that pain. So hopefully that's a bit of context for why we built the plugin framework, but let's dive a bit deeper. So with that said, basically what we're hearing is that we need to be able to support more use cases. We need to be able to support, all those different, modern technologies, cloud-based technologies, in a much more ergonomic way. And as those of you who have used Pact will know that it's very HTTP centric, even though we do support messages in an abstract way. So our goals with the plugin framework are to expand our support to support the widest range of use cases, to improve the time to market for new features, and to grow our community, which is both the number of users using the tool because of the new features we can provide them, but also contributors, because hopefully writing a plugin for Pact is going to be a much smaller lift, a much less effort than getting involved with having to make a massive change to the core of our framework. And without going in too much, there's a bit of background here on our repo, on our website, but basically the way we've built the Pact up until now, we've got about 11 or 10 plus languages. We either rewrite the entire Pact engine from scratch in each language, or use what we call a shared core. And we have two shared cores. We originally used Ruby, and we've been moving to Rust. And the idea is that shared core is going to take on a lot of the burden of writing Pact files and doing a lot of matching rules and all these complicated logic. And then your language would just expose that out to the world. But there's still limitations with that, because each language, if we added a new feature like message Pact, for example, then needs to go and implement a new DSL inside that language, and also implement and communicate messages and new APIs to the Rust core. So this is where plugins came in. We figured, what if we built a framework that was generic, that every language could implement, and then anybody could create a plugin and make it available to every single language in one go. So for example, we wanted to support protobus and gRPC. And the idea is that somebody can create that plugin in whatever language makes sense for them, distribute it out to the internet, and any language that supports plugins can take advantage of that new capability. And so that's how we can both reduce the time to market and hopefully increase the number of contributors. And of course, most importantly, we can also create more use cases as well more quickly. So let's dive in a little bit more into the concepts of the Pact framework and kind of how it's going to start serving those needs. The first thing I want to mention is that with plugins, at the moment, you can create two different types of plugins. One is what we call a transport plugin or a protocol plugin. So something like gRPC is a good example, or WebSockets. And you can also create your content types. So things like protobufs or GraphQL or SOAP, for example. You might want to create a SOAP specific binding. So one is more around how the information passes, the wire protocol, and one is around the types of content that you can match. We'll also be supporting the ability to create custom matching rules as well. So you'll be familiar with matching rules from Pact. We currently have matching rules, but you can't extend them yourself. We would also provide the ability to do that. So moving forward a little bit, We also have those matching rules, as I talked about, and expressions. You can use this in the language. So as you'll see later, the framework has a way of passing in tests. In the way you can author those tests in the framework allows you to use these matching rules and expressions, very similar to what you can do with Pact today. And a lot of those primitive matching rules that you're used to already exist, as well as the ability to do things like each key and each value. So very quickly, you'll still be able to test lists and enumerated items pretty quickly, as well as basic string matching, type matching, regex matching, and so on. So the expressions you get early on are still fairly expressive. Use that same word again. And the third component I want to talk about here is the interaction types. So this actually is not actually to do with plugins, but what it is modeled in the latest version of the Pact specification. But what we've done is we've expanded the types of interactions that you can do in your test. So you'll be familiar with the HTTP interactions already, synchronous HTTP. This is really our standard HTTP model, which you're all used to. Asynchronous / messages is the way we've built the async messaging. So things like publish and fire and forget type messages. But the one we've introduced recently is synchronous messages. And this enables you to have a single request with multiple responses back. So this enables things like calls to Lambda, or so bidirectional kind of communication. So just maybe to talk about some of the use cases you can do with this is with the synchronous HTTP model. You can model RESTful services with JSON or SOAP or JSON RPC or GraphQL. With asynchronous messages, it's things like Kafka, fire and forget, or server push. And with synchronous messages, we open up some more use cases. So things like gRPC protobus, where you've got that request response or RPC style communication that's not over HTTP, or WebSockets, MQTT data pipelines, Lambda to Lambda calls, so on and so forth. So this third interaction model really opens up a whole new use cases. But then when you combine that with those different plugin capabilities we talked about, rich support for those frameworks and protocols emerge. And really, you should be able to test almost any sort of API or use case you can think of in your architecture with those combinations. And just kind of conceptually, where it fits in here is, just like you had before, we've kind of got this cycle where the consumer writes a unit test, those interactions, the tests run, that produces a contract file, the provider verifies it, and so on. Where plugins come into it is that sort of purple line. It basically connects into the Pact framework, which is in the middle. And then Pact is going to delegate out a lot of the responsibility for certain things out to those plugins, whether that be providing a mock server or it doing the verification on behalf of a user, or providing rules to match content or generate content. So just kind of slots in the middle there. All right, we'll take a quick check. If there's any questions, please do put them in the Q&A. Once we've gone through those concepts, you might have a few ideas bubbling in your mind. Yusuf, was there anything else you want to add to any of that before we move on to a little bit of a demo?
Yeah, I just think when you mentioned about being able to build the transport mechanism and the content matches and generators, at that point with the Pact Plugin Framework, you're essentially building Pact. Once you're able to extend on top of that with things like the matching rules, but also the additional use cases that we potentially talked around request headers, so things around authorization. So we often see people wanting to test AWS endpoints and they need to overwrite authorization headers. So really the use cases can be quite broad. And one of the great things about this being available to all our open source tools is they'll all be able to, all these different technologies will be able to take advantage of the features of the Pact broker in terms of keeping those contracts organized and managed in place. I appreciate,
good call out.
And I also appreciate in terms of questions, conceptually, it might be a bit hard to get your head around until you kind of see it in action. So we've built a few demos, which Matt will go through during the course of this webinar. We'll signpost you after, and you can come chat to us in Slack and honestly ask any questions. Because of the world of possibilities, there's no silly question now with regards to can I test that with Pact, where before we kind of rigidly had to say where our boundaries were.
Absolutely. Got a +1 for the auth headers there. All right, so let's move on to a use case. You can actually follow this use case on YouTube. That link is not very readable, but we'll post it afterwards in a few different places on social media / in our Slack channel. What we're going to do though is we're going to go through a hypothetical use case, and because I'm a narcissist, it's all based around me. And the use case is a fictional protocol called the MAT protocol, and capitalize MAT because basically the way it works is every message that goes over a wire will start and terminate with the word MAT in capitals. It's a text-based protocol designed for efficient communication to me, and it will work over things like TCP as well as HTTP. And what we're going to build is a plugin, or we're going to show how we're using a plugin, sorry, that implements this protocol, both as a content type matcher, but also the transport for it as well over TCP, because obviously a TCP transport needs to know how to parse the actual protocol itself. And so this is a real thing we've built. There's a BNF grammar for it and so on. So I'm just going to reshare my screen now. I'm going to share my whole desktop. Hopefully this doesn't explode. We'll find out what happens.
We see an internet pipe burst across the
what was that?
We see an internet pipe burst as the data starts from your laptop.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just to let people know, I fired a link to this repo just so you can.
Oh yeah, thanks, Yusuf. Great. Okay, of course that comes up. All right, so what I'm going to do over here is I'm going to move into my Pact test, and we'll just kind of go through this line by line. So I don't know how I've jumped so far ahead in the talk there, but let's go back here. Okay, so as I said, we're going to implement a protocol that communicates with the MAT message, and so all messages are going to be sort of gated by that name. So we have a MAT plugin that implements that protocol, and we're going to use it in in our Pact test, and I'm going to use it over here in a JavaScript Pact test. So hopefully this is legible to you. I'm just going to collapse in a little bit. We've got two sets of tests actually. We've got one test that's going to test an HTTP consumer that knows how to communicate the MAT protocol. We're also going to do one over TCP and show that new interaction pattern as well, which is a synchronous synchronous message. I don't know why they've named it like that. It's very difficult to say it to say it in words. So diving into our example a little bit, the first thing we're going to do, of course, is we're going to instantiate the Pact object, the Pact class. Can't speak today. Give it a name, provider. We're going to specify that it's a new v4 specification, and we're just going to set the log level to error or whatever the environment variable, whatever we set in the environment. And then what we're going to do is we're going to construct our HTTP request, and we'll come back to these two lines in a second. But over here, we're going to follow something fairly similar to what you're used to seeing, with a small difference. We're actually going to have a plugin installed, which I'll show you how I've done that in just a moment. And then we're going to write a test that uses a new content type. So we're going to say, Pact, we're going to add an interaction where the MAT protocol exists, given a request to /MAT using the MAT plugin. I'm saying my name a lot, which is kind of very narcissistic, as I said. We need to identify the name of the plugin and also the version of the plugin that we need for this, because obviously different versions will be created and used just like anything else. We then, we can create the request side of this Pact test. So it's going to be a post to the MAT endpoint. And we're going to, excuse my editor popping up. We're going to specify that we're going to use plugin contents to populate this test. And in this case, this takes two arguments. The first one is the content type. And the second one is an arbitrary structure that the plugin needs to be configured. So this second part is very plugin specific. Not all plugins will have the same structure because they'll be. The idea is we can really model anything here. So, Yusuf talked about it. What if we actually wanted to pull in an OAS here as well and validate that as part of our request? We can do that in a plugin. Plugins can essentially fire arbitrary code. So whatever goes into this configuration here is really up to the plugin author. In our case, we've kept it really simple. It's a simple structure that says, for the request side, this is the body. It's going to be a hello string. And on the response side, we're going to have a body and it's going to return back world. And this is where you also might use things like those expressions. So you might say matching type hello to say, we're actually going to use a hello string right now. We want it to match the type. So just kind of basically a type matcher. We might also say regex type thing. You get the idea. So that's where expressions would go. This plugin doesn't support that because we've kept it very simple, but other plugins can. So on the request side, we're going to expect our consumer to send a message, a mat message formatted that contains the word hello in it. And we expect to get back world, right? That's what we're saying here. And then down in our execute test function, this is where we basically, obviously on the consumer side, we're going to make the request against the mock server. This mock server is going to be provided by Pact because it's the HTTP mock server. However, because it's the request side is content type application mat, and the response side is application mat, that's all going to be handled by our new plugin. So we're going to send a request to the mock server URL that's provided by the framework. We're going to send some headers to specify the content types that we're sending and we accept, obviously. And then data is what we're actually going to send over the wire. Now, obviously, it's really important that we implement our protocol in our client as well. So we've got two little functions here. One is generating a mat message that takes a string. And really all it does is it's going to pack it back inside a mat formatted string. Not very complicated. And vice versa, we're going to replace very crude protocol implementation. We're going to, on the response side, when we get back data, we need to strip off the mat things so we can look at the actual payload inside that. So this is our whole protocol implementation over here. And that's it. We're going to issue the request. We're then going to get the response. We're going to parse the message, and we expect it to be well, right? So not very complicated, but hope that gives you a bit of an idea. So npm run test consumer. I think that's the right command. Let's fingers crossed, see how it works. And oh no, I haven't. npm run. Not spelled. Oh, capital C. Thanks. Sorry, it's hiding behind my Zoom box, so I can't see it.
It's curse of the demo gods always. Yep.
It'll fail now.
I cannot type in a webinar. God bless.
Of course, the demo gods for me now is actually my antivirus. I don't know why it's taking so long to run. It normally takes like a second. So we'll just talk through that. While that's happening, what I'm going to show you is, oh, there we go. It's decided to wake up. And of course it has failed. Why has it failed? I'm just going to run that again. And hopefully it was just a timeout or something. Of course, before, there we go. It's going to work now. Yep, don't know why. All right, so that was the consumer test passing. You can see it's actually doing the HTTP one and the TCP one. I'll show you what the TCP one looks like in a second as well, but I just wanted to show you the HTTP one before I went through the whole code base. So what I wanted to quickly show you as well is the way we can actually install a plugin. And we've got this plugin CLI. So this is provided by the framework. You can see there's a whole bunch of plugins I've got there. But specifically, you can see that there's a bunch of mat plugins I've previously installed. The way I do that is there's multiple ways you can distribute your plugins, but the simplest one and most common one will be probably where we distribute the binaries to GitHub as a release. And the plugin CLI knows how to install that. So I'm just going to Pact plugin install. And let's have a look at the, is there a mat plugin somewhere here? Mat. There we go. There's an example of the mat plugin. So you can see we're just going to run the CLI, the install command, -y to automatically download it. And I'll just hit yes on that one. Hopefully that release is still there. It should be, yep. And again, my machine, oh no, there we go. So installing the mat plugin, it's going out to GitHub. And there you go, it's actually just downloaded it. Installed okay. So that's kind of how you can install a plugin. There's actually other ways to do it as well, but that would be the recommended way. Sorry, Yusuf?
Just one thing to note on that now that our mat plugin is downloaded and we can list it with that tool, it's stored in our home folder under the .pact key, which we're only using for the Pact plugins at the moment. But I think this pattern might be nice when we consider people tend to have Pact across multiple projects, and we've got kind of our config spread in multiple places. Maybe this might be a home for more centralized config.
Yeah, I actually use the home directory in the Pact Go library as well. One of the quirks of the way Go works is you can't download other artifacts as part of the installation. It just downloads raw code. And so when you do the installation, it's hard to know when you're running the tests what you bundled in there. So I actually basically write a Go configuration file to this directory as well. So in the home directory, but yes, as you said, it's in the Pact plugins directory. You'll see there's a whole layout in there, and if you even follow that further, and we'll just pick the map plugin or something, you'll see that there is a map plugin, which is the binary that this will execute. There's also a JSON file which configures that plugin. Have a quick look at that as well. You can see there, it's got this kind of little interface to it. We have a guide for how to write a plugin that kind of goes through this a little bit more, but you can get the idea. But basically, the name and the version that exists here, and the entry point, this is how you're going to actually kick it off. And there's other things you can pass in flags and whatnot, but the simplest by far is to build an executable that works across platform. It doesn't require any kind of complicated arguments or anything. But yeah.
Definitely. But just in the spirit of extensibility, although we try and say ship a single cross-platform binary, we have the ability there to set different paths and things for different platforms. So for example, if you've got a bat file on Windows, but everything else is just a flat file, we can support that. So whatever you need, we got you.
Yep. And look, our recommendation would be for if you want to spread your plugin as far and wide as it could be, the simplest is to just have a single binary that works cross-platform, or that has you have a cross-platform set of binaries like the map plugin does. But if you're working in an ecosystem that's only using Java or only using Node, and you can rely on that the Node runtime or the Java runtime will be there. There's nothing stopping you from writing one in Node or in Java or in whatever language that makes sense to you that might require a different runtime. But of course, yeah, we would recommend for building something very generic and widely available, cross-platform binaries would be the way to go. Absolutely. So yeah, let's move on to the second test case, which is going to be the TCP interface. So similarly, again, we're going to write a little unit test here. This one's even smaller, but it's a request response style interaction. So we're going to take our pact, we're going to add a synchronous interaction. So the next thing you'll know here is now in the v4 spec, you can actually have multiple different types of interactions all in the same pact file, and you can verify those different types of interactions all in the same pact file. So those of you who've dealt with messages before, you'll know that prior to that, you would need to give them different names to be able to support different interaction types. That's been corrected in the v4. So we're going to add a synchronous interaction saying a map message. Again, we're going to say we need a plugin for this to work. This could be a different version of the plugin, by the way. You might have upgraded to version 4 if you needed it, but we'll stick with 2 there. Again, we're going to say, given the plugin contents for this, and in this case here, because it's a synchronous interaction, the way the plugin accepts that content type is both the request and response in a single message there. And then what we do is, again, we're saying it's a content type application mapped. And then when this runs, the plugin driver will go, okay, we're going to use a plugin to configure this content, and it uses the application content type, the MIME type, to look up which plugin is actually going to serve that. And then also this plugin is also providing the transport for this. So we also have a new transport called the map transport, and that's going to be a TCP transport. And we're going to run it on a given host, which I think is 127.0.0.1. Yep. And that's it. And now we're going to execute the test. And over here, the test is going to send a TCP message that says hello on it to the host that we've defined and to the dynamically allocated port that the test case gave us. So this is returned back from this transport config. Why can't I code in that anyway? The transport config contains the configuration, the address and the port, right, that we've configured. And then of course, we're just going to make sure we get back a TCP well to the TCP version of this. We've obviously specified TCP just to show that it's a bit different. I won't show the implementation for sending a message, but it's basically writing to a socket. So you saw that running before that passed. So the more interesting thing now is checking out the provider side, because the provider needs to be able to support these 2 use cases too. So moving over to our provider code base, we can see that before we started up the test case, we're going to just wait for the HTTP provider server and a TCP server to start up, because we need to send requests to both of those different types of protocols. And then over here in our verifier, we specify the URL of our HTTP service but also we can now specify that our provider supports multiple transports, and that in this case, it supports the MAP protocol on a TCP scheme on this given port. And what that means is the verifier will now go, okay, cool. Any interactions that need to use a MAP protocol is going to send it to this endpoint. Just because we're doing local development here, we haven't published to a broker. We're just specifying the relative path to the Pact file, but this will work just like you would with any kind of, as Yusuf mentioned before, you can publish this to any Pact broker, the open source one or Pact Flow, and it will work just like you expect it to. And that's it. And then we specify verify provider. Now, I won't go into these implementations. One is an express server that listens on the MAP endpoint, sends all that and generates a message. The TCP server is very similar, except listens on a TCP socket instead. So let me go back to our test case. I'm just going to run that again. This is going to run the entire suite on both the consumer and provider side. Cool. There's a verification kicking off. Here we go. So you can see that it's done 2 separate verifications for the my consumer and my provider participants. The first one is a MAP message, which generates a message, has a matching body. That was good. That's our TCP case. And then the second one is a standard HTTP case. So it's issued the call to the MAP endpoint. It's got back a 200. It's got the correct header, and it's got a matching body. Now, if I were to just modify the HTTP server for a second and just either not generate a message here or put something else in there, because at the moment we've got a hard-coded npm test. I might have already deleted the Pact directory before I control-C that, so we'll find out. No, there we go. Yeah, there we go. Perfect. So you can see here the expected body world is not equal to the actual body. Blah 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 blah. Now this error message is actually coming back directly from the plugin itself. So again, it's going to depend on what type of content you're dealing with here. It will determine how those error messages are conveyed to you, and specifically the path that it's actually an issue for. So there's different types of content. There's hierarchical content, there's columnar content, and so on. In this case, it's plain text. Yeah, okay. Sorry, my daughter's there. And so my daughter's trying to talk to me. I need to go down.
Yeah, just something on those different types of content types. So normally, traditionally, we might be dealing with JSON. We mentioned tabular content type. So we do have a plugin that deals with a CSV content type as well. And there's quite granular control in terms of the data you can return. So you can either give quite detailed kind of it occurred in this line in your request. There's also some additional information you can put in your content types, like interaction kind of markup. So there's that can be rendered in a Pact broker. So there's lots of kind of, when you start looking at the plugin server itself and the responses you can send, it makes
good shout out.
Cool.
The protobuf one's pretty cool. The protobuf pulls in the protobuf itself and actually will read that a bit more and provide some more context about which RPC method it was calling, and I think even the type in there as well that it was using. So very cool.
Definitely, when you're looking at these responses for your matching, have your consumers of your plugin in mind, because obviously it's great when your tests are working, but when they fail, you really want to kind of have that needle in a haystack view of where the errors are. So this can help you really pin down, depending on your implementation.
Thanks, Yusuf. So yeah, that is it for the demo. We can definitely go a lot further, but would happily take any questions as well. So feel free to put those in the chat. I might pass over to Yusuf, who can talk about how we can, how you guys can get more involved, and what next from here.
Thank you very much, Matt. So yeah, how can you get involved? Like, do you want in? What can you do? Are you just a bit maybe just trying to soak it all in and get your kind of head around what conceptually kind of plugins are. Maybe you're the kind of person who likes building, you want to try it out yourself, or you wish to try out a demo. Maybe that's a demo of something that's already working. So first thing we'd say is probably, I'm not going to talk about this in order because I'm weird. I'm going to go for try it out first. So first, try it out. We've got some great content that we've put together. So we've just launched a new Pact Flow University that reuses some of the great training material that we've already got across the site. There's a create a plugin course, and that will allow you to create your first plugin. So even if you have an idea of covering a particular content type, you want to create a Pact plugin, and we're talking about making cross-platform binary distributables. You just want to make a content type or kind of match a plugin. We've got you covered. So we've got a Go plugin template in GitHub that you'll be able to just create your own plugin from, and you'll be able to follow the quick start guide either in your machine or in a Killer Coder interactive in-browser tutorial. We'd love for you to try it out. If you try it out, we'd love for you to talk about it, blog about your experiences, vlog about it, good or bad. We love hearing about that. So we'll send you some links over and you can look at them in your own time. What's in it for you? Why should you actually get involved, and why would you want to? So first off, you've got the potential to be living on the bleeding edge. There's lots of new transport protocols coming up all the time, and people often talk about wanting to contract test them. We hear about GraphQL, Avro, obviously gRPC, but that's been covered by our first use case in the Pact Plugin Framework. People have been requesting Avro. We can look at our Canny open source board, and getting involved in one of these plugins and kind of being first to the market will definitely be a great boon for the community, but a great way to kind of spotlight your capabilities in the open source. You can really contribute to the future state of creating Pact and maintaining it as the de facto leader. We know that you're here because you're passionate about Pact. You've probably been using it for years and you're advocates of it in your community and in your organizations. So we'd love to be able to help you cover those use cases. We've also, if you don't know, we've got our 10th, we're nearly 10. We'll be celebrating next year, early next year. We'd love to do shout outs for some of the material that you guys will be producing. We'd love to bring you on stage to speak about your experiences with Pact. And we've got some swag. As some of you may know, we were, Pact Flow was acquired, and we are now supported by SmartBear. So that means we can get some great benefits and we can pass them on to you for being involved in our community.
Thanks, Yusuf. Great chat on. Oh, sorry.
After you, buddy, go for it.
Oh no, I was just going to say on the Canny board, we've got, if you search plugins on our Canny board, which is on pact.canny.io, so I'll put a link in the chat there for everybody as well. If I can find what the chat is. You'll find a bunch of requests there. I think Avro is up there, but I think GraphQL is the most requested plugin, as well as WebSockets. Those seem to be the most commonly requested ones we've got, but definitely Avro is up there. There's people who talked about a sort of Kafka plugin and Amazon. I think there's the possibilities are kind of endless. And
if I was kind of wanting to explore the possibilities of the Pact framework, either go for a use case that's going to work for you, or maybe look at that board and go for one of the higher voted items. Yeah. And if you want to reach out to us on Slack, we can maybe set up a separate channel. We've got one for Avro, and we can gather a little bit of a collective. Just one point to mention, I think in 2 weeks, the 14th, I believe, we'll be holding a workshop where we'll be taking you through creating your own plugin. We'd love to, we've also launched a Pact Plugin directory. So as you start building those plugins, we can start getting them listed on there as well. So hopefully in the next 2 weeks, we'll start seeing some new plugins crop up.
Yeah.
But if not, please join us in a couple of weeks for that workshop.
Yeah, I think there's examples as well, like any examples that people create, and for new plugins or for different ways of using them, definitely reach out. We'll put them there as well as we grow this community. I see the plugins growing as almost a sub community of part of Pact, because it's going to really extend the ecosystem. Yusuf, you mentioned a really interesting use case the other day that I thought might help people understand kind of some of the boundaries and kind of where you can take plugins, because I think, you know, there's sort of obvious use cases for, let me support, you know, some new content type or a transport, but you can actually really go beyond that simple, those kind of simplistic use cases. So let's say I want to GraphQL, that's kind of straightforward, but you were talking about a data use case. Would you like to sort of just quickly sort of, I guess, to take everyone through what you're thinking there and try to pick people's interest in terms of the imagination, how far and wide this lens could be cast?
Was that around the data pipelines?
Yeah, and the database. Yeah, the database training.
Yeah, so I used to, in a former life before completely just playing around on open source all the time, I was working in a consultancy, and we had a loan system, and every time people were making loans, their information was being collected and fed into kind of credit application systems. This information was all held in a database, and as these transactional interactions were taking place, there was information being recorded in the database. Now, big data, or sorry, kind of a lot of BI reporting really needs real-time data. So we often see that some of the best ways to get data out in near real time is often directly from your database. So when changes happen in your database, you can, what's known as logical replication, you can replicate these messages somewhere else. So sometimes you could do physical replication where you do it to another database, but in traditional kind of event-driven architecture, you might be streaming those messages from your database through an event stream, such as Kinesis or Data Lake. Those messages might be transformed from your database format, so say Postgres, into a message format for transmission, so say JSON over Kinesis. Your message might then be transformed by a Lambda. So it might be transformed from the internal database format into whatever your BI systems need. And then that might be dropped into an S3 bucket as a CSV. There might be then another system that you don't know anything about that comes and picks up that data and puts it into a report that means a lot of things for a lot of people, and a lot of money is riding on it. Now, when we talk about Pact, you know, helping us at that kind of endpoint level for HTTP, you know, it protects me as a developer when I'm making that change on my machine as to knowing the scope of my impact, but it's not as transparent or easy to work out that change of your impact when, say, you make a change in your database structure. If you've now got kind of several layers of abstraction away and these really important systems relying on it, how can you build up this kind of chain of contracts? So with the idea of being able to store within a single Pact file these different response and request models and build up your message structure, it can potentially allow you to build up a chain of these potential interactions. So in order to build like a useful, to actually get business value out of this transaction happening in my system, all these things need to take place. You've got all these little contracts, but you've got this big contract across this whole system. So I can see a use case here for me back in that world for contract testing, the transformation that happened in my database. I could then see the contract test between the database message being transmitted by the transformer to my message stream, and then a pact being tested at the point of that message being transformed. And then because we've got a CSV plugin, I can read that tabular format that CSV is in. So as you start connecting those dots as your wider system, Pact before was able to help you with contract testing in some small areas. One of our community maintainers, he said to us, every test is a contract. Now, not every test is a contract test in our sense of Pact, but yeah, every test is a contract. So
yeah,
possibilities are endless.
Yeah, no, I think it's great. I think it's a great use case, and you know, maybe I can just put one in there before we drop off. And I'll just make the point here as well. I think you might have already seen the poll pop up, but as you have said, we're looking to run a few workshops, at least a workshop in the next little while, and possibly some more next year as well. If you are interested, please do register yourself in this poll, and we'll connect with you afterwards and make sure you get an invitation to that. One of the use cases I was thinking of, I previously did some consulting work at a bank prior to Pact Flow, and we built a microservices layer on top of a mainframe. And you know, mainframes are sort of stuck in a particular era. They're
heritage applications.
Applications. Yeah, I hate the word legacy because they're powering the world, right? But you know, they do have their peculiarities, and we wanted to write some contract tests between these systems so we could decouple ourselves a little bit, because again, famously within banks, things move quite slow. You always need test environments. This was a great way of being able to do that. However, it spoke of this binary protocol, AS2805. I believe there's an ISO version of that as well in the international space. But basically, it's bin packed messages, and so we couldn't do that with Pact at the time. But with plugins, we could absolutely do that. We could do something you saw before in the test. We could put some structure that makes sense for the test to work, make sure our code can serialize the correct message on the outside, and then verify that against a real provider that knows how to deal with that, binary packed message. And we'd be able to ensure that those two systems could have communicated. So I do think these possibilities are endless. And as we said before, the plugins are just arbitrary code. They can execute things, they can pull things in, they can download stuff, they could run remotely. And so I'm really excited to see what people do in terms of stretching the boundaries of what a plugin can do. All right. So I'm going to, I think that's it. I think that's all we've got today. So thank you everyone for coming. Hopefully this was really informative. We hope we can get you to get involved in the ecosystem, and more importantly, we hope that it changes the way you do your contract testing, and that you can actually get value from that